How we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you back to our Season 5, Week 4 around the NCAA recap. Of course, your Panthers coming off a 38-28 victory over the Maryland Terrapins at home. Finally, a solid performance from our offense, though again, turnovers seem to plague us just a little bit. Thankfully, we got a couple of turnovers forced from our defense to at least even things out in that regard. A couple offensive explosions, a really big fourth quarter, 35 points between the two teams, including a couple of very late touchdowns. But a nice game overall. We showed some good battle to come back from a 14-0 deficit at the end of the first quarter. Some adversity at the end of the second quarter with that interception we threw when we were about to kick a field goal. But one of the really big stats you can see there, in the red zone, again, we've been incredible in the red zone this year. 5 trips to the red zone, 5 touchdowns. And I think if you look back between the 3 games, we have like 10 or 12 trips to the red zone and something along the lines of 10 touchdowns. It's been absolutely incredible. What's funny here, if you take a look at the stats, Kenny Pickett, 237 yards, 2 touchdowns, did have the 2 picks, which of course he'll want to have back. The first one especially was particularly bad. But Jay Keys, another incredible day for him. He threw for a touchdown, 1 of 1 passing. Got to have the best quarterback ranking in Pitt history. He also had 7 receptions for 50 yards. CJ London and Todd Sibley both ran well. I liked using both of them, but London was fantastic out of the backfield, had a 32-yard catch, 5 total catches on the day. KJ Welsh had 5 catches plus that gigantic run on the jet sweep. Paul Lease had a nice jet sweep. The one from KJ Welsh was incredible. He went for 42 yards or something, I think it was. 4 sacks on the day. Sean Wolfgang with a pair, Sutton with his first, which was great to see. Interception for Damian Vector, and he forced a fumble, which Quell Hampshire was able to recover. So incredible day for the freshman Vector out of West Virginia, the former 4-star. Fantastic to see the new guys that we've brought in make such an impact. Like I said, Sutton with the sack, that we did lose him to injury partway through the game after that sack, and so we wait and see what the results of his testing is for how that injury is going to impact us the rest of the season. But it was a nice day overall. Maryland, they ran the ball well. Most teams seem to have been running the ball well against us so far this season, but we did enough to kind of slow them down throughout the course of the day. They ended up throwing, I think, for 150 yards in the fourth quarter when they got behind and did score 14 points, but it is what it is. And now this is the horrific news. Tyquan Sutton, the 5-star recruit out of Southlake, Texas, true freshman, broken vertebrae, out for the season. So a similar injury that affected senior Aaron Matthews last year. Sutton with an injury that you really don't want to take lightly. He's going to need to rehab for at least this entire offseason, and we'll see how things go as we get into next year. But we do get some great news on the back end of that victory. Tim Lewis and Jesse Coley are our first 2 commits of this recruiting class, and Lewis was probably the most important one of the entire recruiting class because we're losing our senior kicker, and so he's going to come in and more than likely be a starter as a kicker for us as a freshman. 85 overall is what he's projected at as he comes in. Number 3 kicker in the entire country. He knew we were going to need one. He knows we have a very good team, so we were able to convince him to come in. Jesse Coley, the 4-star quarterback from Bayonne, New Jersey, playing at St. Peter's Prep. Number 12 quarterback in the country. He's a scrambler. We held off some interest from Army. Lewis also had interest from Army and Navy. So interestingly enough, both of the service academies were trying to sign these guys. We were interested in Penn State, had a look at both of them as well. So we were able to fight off our rivals to get these 2 big signings. Coley's a big one because, of course, we were going to need a quarterback with Kenny Pickett graduating. We need to add to our quarterback room there. Tim Lewis, the incredible thing to see here, scouted him. I only have 50% scouting turned on because that was a house rule I did for this year, so I could scout 3 stars in the pipeline and below. And Lewis has 88 kick power, which is incredible because Jay Bump doesn't have great kick power, so it's good to have a kicker that comes in with very good kick power. I think he'll be kicking bombs by the time he's a senior. Jesse Coley, he should have good speed, but unfortunately he has 80 throw power and 80 accuracy, so not a fantastic arm. It's not terrible, but it's not great. So he's a guy that will get into our quarterback room. He's a 4-star prospect, so more than likely, obviously, he's not going to compete for the starting job next year. AC Reese should have that locked up with Pickett graduating, but he's a guy that after a couple of years of seasoning behind AC Reese could potentially have an impact for us. Now, across the ACC in the games this week, Duke 31-28 upset over number 21 Florida State. Incredible come-from-behind victory. 21 points in the second half and then 3 points in the overtime, so 24 unanswered points to knock off Florida State. And probably the upset of the weekend, Hawaii 35-10 over NC State. The Rainbow Warriors with another big win. They beat Kansas State already this season, and then they knock off NC State. So incredible win there. Louisville with a blowout over Buffalo. Virginia smokes Boise State. Clemson 29-25 in a big matchup over Virginia Tech. Huge ACC game that those teams needed to win. Syracuse lost, and Boston College won here on the weekend. In the top 25 around the country, Penn State 35-30 holds off a heavy comeback effort from Purdue to win by 5 away from home. Missouri knocks off Ole Miss 35-23, so big victory for the Tigers. They stay unbeaten. South Carolina hands LSU, the defending national champions, their second loss, and the loss that more than likely takes them from the ranks of the unbeatens and takes them or not to ranks of the unbeatens, but takes them from any chance of repeating as national champion this year. An incredible scoring affair, 59-43. And what was crazy that you saw, LSU had two interceptions returned for touchdowns, and that means it may spell the end to Lindsey Scott's tenure as the starting quarterback at LSU. Calicolio, the true freshman we know, waiting in the wings, and I'd expect him to possibly start the next game for LSU. Ohio State 21-17, they hold off Northwestern, get a late touchdown in the fourth quarter to come away with the victory. Washington knocks off UCLA. Number 20 Washington looking to get back to winning ways. They were national champions 2 seasons ago, remember. UCLA, the team that always seems to get so close to the playoff and never make it, they have one loss on the season already. Normally they like to wait till game 12 or 13 to get that first loss, but they have it already this year. SMU beats Florida Atlantic in overtime to stay unbeaten. Florida knocks off Tennessee to knock them from the ranks of the unbeatens in a huge ranked battle there. UCF loses to Texas. UAB loses to Kansas State, so they're not going to be replicating their unbeaten season from last year, falling to Kansas State. Good performance from Kyle Trask at quarterback, but UAB unable to come from behind with 24th quarter points. And Bama 45-0 over Vanderbilt. Great season so far for the Crimson Tide. Interestingly enough, the middle linebacker Brian Bennett that took us on this past weekend had 15 tackles in the loss to Pitt, 3 for a loss, a sack, and an interception. So he wins NCAA Defensive Player of the Week. Kari Lyles for Wisconsin, 408 yards passing and 6 touchdowns to win Offensive Player of the Week. And we win another Defensive Player of the Week award. That's the third week in a row, third time's a charm. We've got the hat trick. Damian Vector forces a fumble and has an interception, earns himself Defensive Player of the Week in the ACC. Jawan Pass for Louisville had a Lamar Jackson light-esque performance, 262 yards passing, 83 yards rushing, 4 total touchdowns in the victory for Louisville over Buffalo to get Offensive Player of the Week honors. Now, following those results individually, Rico Dowdell with 2 touchdowns and 160 yards of offense in the victory over LSU. He moves up to the top spot in the Heisman watch for now, though Stephen Davis, I think, had 4 touchdowns for Auburn in their victory, so I'll be interested to see when he jumps back into the title race, or into the Heisman race. Dorian Thompson-Robinson had a great game, 400 yards for UCLA in their loss, so he still stays in there. Ian Welsh, 200 yards plus and 4 touchdowns for Army, who's unbeaten on the season again, to get into the Heisman race. And Bowman Sells, who took over at quarterback at Houston with De'Aaron King going to Alabama, he's right there in the Heisman race as well after a great win for Houston, who's now into the top 10 of the rankings. Auburn comes back into the top 10 as well from 13. The top 5 stays the same, but then of course following the upset losses around the country in the bottom half of the top 10, we do see a little bit of shakeouts. UCLA with their loss to Washington falls back to number 11. Florida comes up to 12 after beating Tennessee, who falls back to 17. Washington jumps up to 15 with their victory over UCLA. You see Tennessee, of course, there they go, falling back to 17. LSU only falls to number 18 because their loss did come to South Carolina, who jumps up to number 20. So not horrific for the Tigers, but they definitely have a lot of work to do to even get an SEC title now. NC State lost, of course, to Hawaii. I'm surprised they even stayed in the rankings with that loss. Blowout loss to the Rainbow Warriors. They dropped down to number 19. USC at 23. Wake comes back into the polls at 22. Missouri at 3-0 now with their win knocking Ole Miss from the rankings, comes in at number 24. Ole Miss, Florida State, and Miami all fall out of the top 25. Of course, Miami with their second straight loss as they went down to Wake Forest last week. And Hawaii receiving votes. Look at that. Could we see them in the polls very soon? Could be a very good season for the Warriors from Honolulu. Big games coming up this weekend. Clemson taking on Virginia. Virginia's looked incredible this season, number 5 scoring offense in the country, but they don't put up a ton of yards. I think they've just been a bit fortuitous, so that's going to set up a big matchup in the ACC, as the Cavaliers have to go to Death Valley to take on an always tough Clemson team. Georgia Tech takes on NC State, who looks to get back to winning ways. Miami and Louisville, another good ACC game, as will be Wake Forest at Florida State. Across the NCAA, you can see some big matchups here. Oregon State 2-0 right now at UCLA, who's coming off, of course, that loss to Washington, but don't look past the Beavers. They've had a good start to the season and look to continue their winning ways. Houston takes on ECU. We have, of course, the ACC matchups we just talked about, and then Auburn taking on Tennessee is going to be a great one as well. Wake at Florida State. Of course, the Demon Deacons at 2-1. Jamie Newman, their starting quarterback this year. The Tigers, led by a couple of guys who want to get in the Heisman race in Woody Barrett and Stephen Davis Jr., taking on Jarrett Guarantano and Tennessee, who was in the Heisman race just a week or two ago. The Volunteers, after losing to Florida, looking to get a victory at home at Neyland Stadium over the Tigers. Oklahoma takes on Kansas State in a big ranked battle. Some very good games here about to take place between a few ranked teams as they try and solidify themselves in their conference play as it starts to get underway. Should be a good game for the Sooners and quarterback Al Dingle, who's trying to play well to hold off freshman Taylor Savage from stealing his starting job. USC looks to get back on the right side of 500 as they take on unbeaten Cal. Same thing with LSU. Kelly Collier will be starting, is the rumor coming out of Baton Rouge, as they travel into Mississippi to take on a very solid Mississippi State team who's had a good defense so far this season, number 14 defense in the country. Kelly Collier will do his best in his first career start for the true freshman. SMU currently unbeaten at number 14 in the country. Always an incredible offense that they have running out of Dallas. They'll take on local rival TCU and what may potentially be a Big 12 matchup in the future, because the Big 12 is looking at expansion, potentially adding 2 more teams so they can have a conference championship game and a better opportunity at playing in the playoff. Ole Miss taking on Alabama is going to be a gigantic game. De'Aaron King getting his first real test as the quarterback for the Crimson Tide, taking on an Ole Miss team that is talented across the board, even though they're 3-1. And Oregon, I don't know if you saw that, is playing Ohio, who they lost to last season. So the Ducks are going to need to look to get revenge at Autzen Stadium against the Ohio Bobcats, who knocked them off last year, and potentially the way their season went kept them out of a college football playoff berth, or at least an opportunity at it with how their season went. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. No game this week, which means the next episode is going to be the week 5 around the NCAA recap, and then we'll get into our preview for our next matchup, which will come in the episode following that. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hail to Pitt. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.